Welcome to our continuing journey of dealing with the question, what is agape love? This week we're considering a characteristic that is so obvious that it's easy to miss it. According to Jesus, the characteristic of listening is crucial to agape love. When the disciples were urging Jesus to reveal his identity, Jesus responded to the question, "Who do you say that I am?" You see, in his relationship with the disciples, he led with a listening ear. In his journey to the cross, Pilate interrogated Jesus. Jesus listened and responded, "You have said so." You see, even in his relationship with an enemy, he led with a listening ear. When he saw a stranger in the crowd, he asked Zacchaeus to come over, and he said, "Zacchaeus, tell me your story." You see, in his relationship with a stranger, Zacchaeus was his name, he led with a listening ear. When he confronted the crisis of a public stoning of a woman engaged in adultery, he doodled in the sand as the accusations were made. In that crisis, Jesus led with a listening ear. One of the, if not the most significant educational experiences I've ever had was a workshop with Rural Howe, who wrote the book, The Miracle of Dialogue. This book explored the dynamics of dialogue, genuine, meaningful, and life-changing communication. Dialogue is different than monologue. Monologue is two persons talking to each other. And Howe led us through several exercises through which we learned that the secret to dialogue was the listening ear. Instead of pretending to listen to the other person, and while they're speaking, you're organizing what you're going to say in response to what that person started to say, but you haven't heard the rest of it. Instead of engaging our own mind in developing a response before the person is really shared, the listening ear is to hear the person all the way through and respond to what they say instead of deciding what you want to say first. He developed a formula that the listening ear leads the dialogue, which results in understanding. And that is the ability to stand under the other, understanding, standing under the other, even when you do not agree. You can still understand, which is a result of dialogue, which begins with the listening ear. He often referred to Jesus, and he would say often, Jesus had a passion to understand the other. And the beginning of understanding is the listening ear. This is why, according to Jesus, a characteristic of agape love is listening. Now, that was really not the best part of the seminar. A snowstorm occurred and prevented those of us who traveled a distance to the seminar from leaving, including rural Ohio couldn't get to the airport. So a freewheeling experience of sharing ensued in that extra day together. Now, one of the topics was preaching. Hal shared, and I was a local pastor at the time, and Hal shared that the reason that preaching was not effective, it was not an effective form of communication, was that it didn't include the miracle of dialogue. He shared how preaching could include the miracle of dialogue if you begin with a listening ear. I was so taken with this possibility that I went home and immediately implemented his Partners in Preaching strategy. Every Sunday, the biblical text and the subject of next week's sermon was in the bulletin, along with an invitation to a Monday noon 1-hour meeting, bring your own food if you want to eat meeting, which was the first step in my sermon preparation. Now, the meetings was sort of went like this. The first question I would ask was, what was the message you received yesterday? Well, I listened and was often surprised and humbled to realize that the intended message wasn't what they received. I guess Rural Hal was right that preaching was not always an effective means of communication. Then a handout was given, noting a summary of the text for the next week, the original situation of the text, what was written, what it originally meant, and I answered any questions about the handout. And for the next 40 minutes, those who came, an interesting mix of people, 15 or 20 usually came, sometimes a few more, and I listened as they responded to the question, how does this text, how does this scripture intersect your life? At home, at work, and at play. For the last 40 minutes, I did not speak. I listened. And as a consequence, my sermon was launched and often nearly finished as I pondered what I heard and prepared to share. Now that snowstorm changed preaching as I was introduced to how agape love could apply to the pulpit if the preacher is willing to begin with a listening ear. It led me to many consequences, including the aversion to being a guest preacher. And the problem with being a guest preacher is that it was so hit and miss in terms of the message. Why? Because it didn't have anything to do with that congregation, because you didn't begin with a listening ear. Now, I share that story to introduce my conviction that agape love penetrates all of life. And the characteristic of building relationships with a listening ear makes a difference in how a classroom teacher enables students to learn, how supervisors motivate persons to work together rather than just alongside each other, how medical professionals become agents of healing beyond curing. how family members learn to trust and serve. You see, this characteristic of agape love, the listening ears, can penetrate who we are and what we do. For there's no part of human life that cannot be transformed with the characteristic of the listening ear. For the classroom teacher to listen to the students to find out who they are and how they might learn. For the supervisor to listen to the person on the line to understand sort of what makes them tick and how they could tick better together than separately. A medical professional listening to a patient. Street language calls that the bedside manner. All the bedside manner is the listening ear. And indeed, how family members can learn to trust and serve each other because they listen first. Human relationships are transformed because agape love was present in the life of a faithful follower of Jesus, because that follower possesses the characteristic of a listening ear. For your thought and conversation, I just have one question. What are your experiences of a listening ear transforming lives and relationships at home, at work, or at play? Thank you for joining us in our journey.